Making It Work is brought to you by the Max Dupree Center for Leadership at Fuller Theological Seminary and the Theology of Work Project.
Welcome to Making It Work.
Through conversation, scripture, and stories, we invite God into work's biggest challenges so that you can live out your purpose in the workplace.
I'm Mark Roberts.
And I'm Leah Archibald. And this is Making It Work. Have you found your passion at work? That one perfect job or life mission that you're great at, that only you can do, and that excites you to jump out of bed every single morning? If your answer is no, then our guest, Liz Forkin Bohannon, says, stop trying. Liz was once herself directionless and clueless about her purpose, but today she is the CEO of Sseko Designs, an international ethical fashion brand that works to educate and empower women around the world. Liz says, you're never going to get anywhere trying to find your passion. You need to build it. She is the author of the new book, Beginner's Pluck, Build Your Life of Purpose, Passion, and Impact Now. Liz Forkin Bohannon, welcome to the Making It Work podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We are so excited to talk to you. So first of all, for those of us who don't know, tell us a little bit about what you do and about your company, Seiko Designs.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of a socially conscious fashion brand called Seiko Designs that is over 10 years old now. We began originally as a way to create economic and educational opportunity for young women who come from backgrounds of extreme poverty, but who are really academically gifted. And really, 10 years later, that's still what we are up to. So we have now an international fashion brand. So we started in Uganda, and we now work in Uganda and Ethiopia, Kenya, Peru, India, all over the world with like-minded suppliers and artisans who are creating community and opportunity for women and girls in their specific local communities. And then those products are sold here in the United States through you guessed it, community of women here in the US. So working not just globally to create economic community and opportunity for women globally, but for women right here at home. So through a network that we refer to as the Seiko Fellows, these are women who sell the product in their own communities. They earn an income. And we've got folks from all different kind of walks of life, some that are in it for the discount and on the beautiful clothes and the community and the purpose and might spend a few hours a week with us, and then other women who are walking alongside of us to build full-time incomes and businesses and teams, and who are really social entrepreneurs in their own right. And together, between the fellows here in the US and then our global community of producers and artisans, are trying to build something that is beautiful and beneficial and uplifts women everywhere.
And tell us, for those of us who are already trying to Google it and
Yeah.
do a little shopping while listening to the podcast, why don't you spell it?
It's Seiko Designs. So that's SSEKO Designs.com. And get ready, because we just launched our spring collection, and it's a real treat. So if you're browsing while you're listening, I can promise your eyes are going to be more tickled than your ears, I might tell you. The Seiko site is more beautiful than my voice is beautiful, so it's a great supplement.
I have a couple things. One is just to say, so I'm not really a clothes guy, but I went to your site, and I got to tell you, your stuff is really beautiful. I mean, and if I say that, that means that I actually say something. Second thing is, you can now answer my big question. How did you get that name? Because I didn't see any explanation on your website of how you got SSEKO.
Yeah, I think it might be buried somewhere very, very far deep in the archives of Q&A. But Nseko is the Lugandan word for laughter. And I mentioned that we actually started in Uganda. That's kind of where our origins as a community are. And so it's based off of the Luganda word for laughter. And in Luganda, and really other languages in Uganda as well, the double S is really common to start off a word, which is obviously very rare in the United States. I don't know if we have any words that start with a double S, but it's a really, really common feature in Uganda. So I thought it was a fun way to uh, incorporate a nod to our country of origin, if you will.
Well, thank you. You've now brought peace to my soul so I can
Good.
listen to the rest.
I'm so grateful. I'm so glad you're going to be able to sleep tonight.
So I'm already sold on your company and your company's mission. And it's because you bring a lot of passion to your work, obviously. And yet you have this book where you're telling us don't go out trying to find your passion. Is that a disconnect? Why don't you tell us why?
Yeah, absolutely. I have to be probably the only leader and, motivational speaker in the world that loves to get on stage and tell people to stop trying to find their passion, and other really inspiring messages like, own your average and dream small. But the reality is, I mean, if you've known me for 10 seconds, I'm pretty passionate. And I believe deeply in the value of living a life that is connected, that is integrated, that is passionate. I have really big problems with how we as a culture and society talk about passion.
Mm.
I think it's filled with a lot of people who are on the other side of the journey, who then are looking at their journey through the kind of, lens of hindsight. And it's just landed us in a place where we use a lot of platitudes, a lot of things that not only are they not helpful, I actually think they're kind of hurtful. And one of those phrases is, find your passion. This is like a mandate of our generation, of our culture, right? Just like go out there and find your passion. And what I find is it just builds up this really unrealistic and unhelpful picture about how one goes about doing that. And I would say that, the difference, the language that I like to use is talking about building your passion. And it can be like, okay, are we splitting hairs here? Is that really semantics? But I actually think it's really important. I, in general, think language is incredibly important. And I think a lot about words and I think they matter. But I think the difference between the posture and the expectations that you have when you set out to find something versus when you set out to build something are really significant, because finding your passion isn't some magical thing that happens. You don't wake up one day, you don't kind of have this moment where everything feels like, it fell into place and you feel all of this confirmation and you've discovered this thing, right? It puts so much pressure on us to open the right door, to say yes to the right opportunity, because it kind of positions it as like, well, if you don't, you're going to be wasting your time when you could have been finding your passion, right? When
Mm.
we think about building, our posture and our mentality and our mindset completely changes. It becomes a lot more, I think we feel a lot more empowered. There's a lot more autonomy, right? When you're like, I'm going to go out and build my dream house, there's no part of you that thinks it's going to accidentally happen, right? There's no part of you
Mm.
that thinks like, I might just get lucky and wake up and my dream house is there, right? It's like, no, you think about going out, you think about dreaming, and you think about putting plans in place, and then you think about a foundation, and then you're going to go over budget and it's going to take longer than you think it's going to. And like you
There's a leeway
assume
for mistakes in there.
totally mistakes. And then also there's beauty in the process, not just the end goal, right? So it's like so often we discount so much of our life, um, because it's like it wasn't that aha moment. So that was wasted time or energy, or I made the wrong decision, versus really believing that there's something for you to learn, that the path isn't linear, and that the more like present and engaged and committed you are to figuring out what is it right here, right now that I actually have to learn that is a process of me building that passion. It takes away some of the magic from it in a good way. And I think it deposits the magic in an even better way, that just requires us to be a lot more present and open and curious and frankly experimental, with how we think about where we're going to land and what it is, that's going to really bring us to life.
So, can we ground this in a life experience a little bit? Like, could you tell us about a time in your work where you were struggling to find your passion and you switched to a mindset of building your passion?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this in Beginner's Pluck, my book that kind of outlines my journey, but really I have a chapter in the book that's called Surprise Yourself. And it's all about just being willing and open to be surprised by what actually excites you and what brings you to life. Because so often, I think from an early age, we're encouraged to kind of wrap up our vocation and in our identity. And then we get a degree in a specific thing. And so we kind of start to have this narrative that it's like, if I go off that path, have I failed in that thing? Or there's just like a lot of angst that's involved in it. And I like to joke that when I was in college, there's plenty of things that I liked, but the two things that I like kind of actively disliked, I kid you not, were fashion. So uninterested in fashion. Just like believed that if you were interested in fashion, you were shallow, you were materialistic, you had no idea what was happening in Syria, right? Like just so uninterested in fashion. And business. I thought business, I had, in the way that only a lovely 20-year-old with very little life experience can think so black and white, but really believe like, hey, there are people in the world that are doing cool stuff. And mainly they're journalists and they're nonprofit leaders and they're activists and they're people, community members. And then you have people that just care about getting rich and building higher, fences and building their own little kingdoms. And those are the business people. And I am very firmly in the former camp. I don't know if I would have said business is evil, but I definitely didn't see it as a mechanism for good. And then here I am 10 years later running a for-profit fashion business, right? And here's the thing. It's not like I'm holding my nose doing it. I'm passionate about fashion. I love it. I'll say I'm less passionate about fashion, like the industry, and I am so wildly excited and passionate about making stuff, making beautiful apparel, footwear, the versatility, like the creation, the implementation, the development, how it integrates in the supply chain, how people feel when they wear it, all of it. I love it. It is so energizing to me. But I never in a million years would have said, I grew up and I was super passionate about fashion. And then now I have this career in fashion, right? And then same with business. I am a fierce advocate for using business as a tool for social good. We've always been a business since the very beginning. We've never been a charity or structured as a philanthropy or a nonprofit. From our very earliest days, Seiko has had this belief that actually, if we want to make a real difference in the world, nonprofits and advocacy organizations and all of that stuff, it's great. It has its place in society, but also we have to be thinking business is, I would say, arguably the most powerful tool and structure in the world. And if we want to really think about change on a systemic and scalable way, it's the thing that each and every one of us interact with every single day, multiple times a day. And I really believe in the power of using business as a tool to create positive social change. And so I'm wildly passionate about running a business.
So how did business and fashion go from things that you disdained to things that were in your toolkit to build your passion?
Yeah, absolutely. It was experimenting, being open to being surprised, being more fixated on a problem than I was on the solution. So when I showed up in Uganda, I met this incredible group of young women. They were in between high school and university. They tested into college, but they couldn't afford to go. And that became my very interesting problem of like, okay, here I say I care about women and girls living in extreme poverty and conflict and post-conflict zones. And now here's 25 women. This very just like I could wrap my hands around that, right? In a way that like global extreme gender inequality is like a little bit hard to be like, I could do something about that. Here was 25 women, many of them who at that point I had relationships with. There was this 9-month gap and it was like, okay, we got to figure out a way to bridge this gap between high school and university. I didn't give two licks how we did that. To me, it was just like solving the problem is really that's my focus. And so I actually started a nonprofit and then learned a ton and was open to changing my mind. Like I wasn't fixated. My identity was not wrapped up in being like, I'm somebody who goes and starts a nonprofit. So when I started to get the clues of like, actually, I think there's kind of a better way to go about doing this, it was like pretty easy for me to drop the idea and be like, well, let's pivot. Let's do something else. I think we need to do business. I want to employ people. I want it to positively impact the local economy. So it was like, cool, drop that, experiment, do something different, pivot, quarter turn, right? So then I started a chicken farm. And that was the point in the story, honestly, in the experimenting where I was like, cool, business model here I'm really interested in that. My brain is pretty lit up thinking about using business instead of kind of a nonprofit model to solve this problem. I see a lot of good in this. The chickens, however, I can't. I am like not like I would wake up in the morning and just be like dead inside when it came to passion for chickens. Just like no, I'm not the girl for that job. Like I can't get excited about it. It's not fun. So then I, just started like experimenting, thinking, dreaming, like what are other things that we could do or make. And I had made a pair of these sandals when I was in college, literally out of just this idea that I wanted a pair of flip flops that didn't flop. And I took a pair of like rubber shower sandals, basically, kind of tore them up, added some ribbon to them, and like voila, I had these, sandals, these flip flops that didn't flop. And I wasn't passionate about it at all. But I was passionate about the problem of like a business solution to create employment and bridge this 9-month gap. And so I was just like, I don't know, maybe we could sell these sandals. Also not interested in it, really. But I just noticed as I went along and just gave myself the freedom to try something without putting it through the lens of like, could I see myself doing this for the next 75 years? Like, does my heart light up, in the morning? Before I did that, I just did the thing. And I started traveling the country and on the back of a motorcycle and like, trying to find raw materials and trying to figure out who was making stuff and what machines do you need and what's the technique and kind of putting together a supply chain and like thinking about costing and then the actual design of the physical thing itself. And I was just so surprised to find that I loved it. I was just so energized by it. I would stay up until, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, like sitting on the floor of the little like hostel that I was living at, tinkering and cutting up leather and making sandals and prototyping things out and going and meeting with different suppliers. And I was just energized by it. And I couldn't have seen that coming. And I never would have discovered it had I not let myself just do the thing and then be open to like, I don't know, does that feel good? Does that fit? So it's all this like, it was just so much iterating and so much experimenting and so little pressure. Like I was so fixated on the interesting problem, which was to me creating this sustainable 9-month gap, for female scholars, that it kind of removed I didn't have time or energy to be like, well, do you love it? Are you passionate about this? Is this your purpose in life? I don't think I would have answered yes to that during that season. It was just like, this is the problem. Seems like this could be a solution. And like, I don't hate doing it. So just keep going. And that over the last 10 years has developed into building a very sincere and very deep passion for these two ways in which I'm still to this day continuing to kind of solve the very interesting problem.
So instead of saying, I'm going to find the one thing that excites me, Liz, you said, I'm going to find whatever it takes to help solve this problem that I'm interested in. And you came to it with a very open-ended problem-solving methodology. Like,
Yeah,
what might work?
exactly.
Let's try this.
Exactly. Now, I still did give myself the freedom, like with the chicken farm, I think, when I tried something that I was like, I'm not excited about this. Being able to like separate it out of like, okay, I am excited about the business part of the chicken farm. I'm wholly unexcited about the product, the chicken, the
Mhm.
mechanism, and like not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and kind of being able to be like, that just puts you in a more experimental mindset of like, okay, so keep the thing that worked. The thing that worked was the model, the vision, kind of the ideology for using business. Let's pivot from the chickens. What's something else we could do? But I think so often we're just so quick to be like, I tried this thing and I didn't like it. And so I just like have to go in a totally different direction, or I failed at that thing, or it was a mistake. Instead of getting really curious and
Yeah.
being like, no, let's like be a little bit more nuanced about that. Like, what worked for you? What didn't work for
Mhm.
you? And really getting into that kind of posture of just like iterating and innovating and experimenting without having to make judgment calls on everything.
Mm. Was at this time, was there like a scripture or a particular story in the Bible that really guided your search for a solution to this problem or your attitude of, open-ended questioning?
I don't know that I would say there was a specific scripture. I think in hindsight, I could go and answer that question for you.
Mhm.
But I do think at the time, my posture in life was pretty guided by my belief that Jesus and that the Lord is with and among the marginalized. And I think in every culture and every community that looks different. But listening and wanting to just go build community and friendships and learn. And so for me, that was, women and girls living in extreme poverty and conflict and post-conflict zones. Um, but it was more out of a belief, like not that that was something that I needed to do, but like that's where life is. Like that's where Jesus hung out, and that's where I believe I'm going to learn about myself and about the world and about who God is, and a belief that, I think the scripture in Micah about loving justice and pursuing mercy and walking humbly is something that has been a verse that's guided my life pretty consistently since I came to know the Lord. And just like that being that co-creator. I love like the verbs in that verse, right? That it just calls us to these like action steps and postures that we have, of like, it's not enough just to care about something. I think that is something that I've become increasingly opinionated about, is that I think we live in a culture right now where people confuse opinions for passion. It's like, oh, she's so passionate. And it's like, okay.
She has very strong opinions.
Because she has super strong opinions. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with strong opinions. I have very strong opinions, but I want to be very honest about like, holding an opinion costs you, like, it can cost you very little. And if you are completely removed from the effects of that opinion, like the word passion, the Latin root word is pati, which means to suffer for. Right? Like in order to say you're passionate about something, I think you have to be living a life that is reflective of your strong opinion that you hold. Or else it's just an opinion. Again, I'm not saying that opinions aren't useful, but they're very different than being passionate about something. And so I think for me, that was kind of one of my come to Jesus moments that propelled me to like quit my job and to move to Uganda, was this sense that I realized that I was calling myself passionate about this issue of like global extreme gender inequality. And then I looked at my life and I was like, that's interesting. Like your life and the life that you're building in your community and your friends and your vocational track and like all of it, none of it has anything to do with that. Like none of it is actually affected by this thing that you say you're passionate about. And so it was kind of this moment where I was like, oh, okay, actually you have an opinion about that thing. But if you want to be passionate about it, go make your life, like go integrate it, go like be on the ground and like have relationships and have your life actually be kind of swept up and integrated in a way that it just like wasn't at the time. Yes. So that was a long answer to your question.
You mentioned the action words, the action verbs in that verse, Micah chapter 6, verse 8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Like there's no, it'll drop out of the sky. Like the action verbs are to act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly. And those actions aren't huge, big, explosive firework actions. They seem very small. I don't know. Mark, I want to bring you into this conversation. Tell me, what is your take on Micah 6:8 and what those verbs mean to you?
Well, I agree with Liz. I mean, they're great verbs. And if you've got to like sort of put in a nutshell what it is to, be a follower of Jesus, that Micah passage is great. And, and it's called to, to love and to seek, to walk. And there is an activity about that. Liz, you were taught, your critique of passion is really good and really important. And part of your critique, of course, is that passion isn't something out there you discover, and you're really clear about that. And I think we're right on. But in the last things you were saying, there's another critique, and you point to this, that I think for some of us, if I'm passionate about an issue, that's almost enough, right? If I'm passionate, then I can just live my life because I'm passionate. So I mean, you can be passionate in this time of history about racial justice in America. That's a good thing. But there is a question to be asked. And what are you doing with that passion. I actually, before this, I had a conversation with a Black leader today who was really challenging me and us in saying, it's great to repent and come out with statements, and that's all important. But now the question is, what are you going to do that's actually going to make a difference in your part of the world? And
Absolutely.
and what you're saying is just so great. And the smallness of it is great too, because sometimes we think, well, what can I do about racial justice? I mean, or what can I do about, global inequities? What can I do about the challenges of women on the other side of the globe? And I can't go to Uganda. I mean, so I think sometimes we let ourselves off the hook for the small mustard seed-ish. There's another Bible verse. Jesus talks about the mustard seed. If we're doing mustard seed work, it's not up to us to make sure it grows up into the big plant. That's God's work. And yet there's a faithfulness to act. And the only other thing I'll say, Liz, and what I love about your stuff is, in my own experience, and I think it's like yours, my passion for something often comes in the action of living into it out of a sense more of right and wrong or duty or opportunity. So I don't sit around, with my wife. I love my wife, but sometimes I'm not feeling all this love for her. I just need to go do the dishes,
Yeah,
and
do an
and
action.
and in the act of doing it, then the emotion comes, then the passion comes.
Yeah, I totally agree with your sentiment about sometimes you have to lead with action and the feeling can follow as opposed to being, totally led by feelings or emotion. They say that like when you smile, you're like if the physical action of smiling regardless of your motivation or your emotion behind it creates and releases endorphins that actually
Yeah,
make you happier, right? And I think that's a
yeah.
really interesting micro example of having there's kind of this idea of orthopraxy versus orthodoxy, right? Where you
Oh,
have to, I think there's this thought that you have to have the right belief, and then out of the right belief the right actions will come. I think that can be argued in some scenarios. I think there's times where it's like you just have to do the right thing,
mm,
and through the orthopraxy you will build the right belief, and probably a belief that is more, I would think, more relevant and grounded. And sometimes we can get so stuck up in either the feeling or the belief. And I think that there can be something really beautiful about saying, just go do the thing,
mm,
and ordering things correctly in that way.
mm,
And I also completely agree with your thought. And especially, I think we're seeing it right now, to your point that you brought up with like race in America, right? That it's like, it costs you nothing to post a black square on Blackout Tuesday. And I still think it's great. Like, I think it's a way of taking a stand and showing support. I'm not disparaging acting on, or a social media action. I think it's a very powerful platform. But if we're not asking the question of like, but what comes next? And frankly, what are the things that I'm doing behind the scenes that are facilitating in that in my own life, right? That it doesn't have to be like, I'm not going to go out and start a like racial justice organization. Like, that's not my calling in life. I don't think I'm equipped to do that. I'm not the person. But if I'm like showing up on social media saying like Black Lives Matter, but I'm not thinking about, okay, if Black Lives Matter, how does that play out in my home, sitting around my dinner table with my 2 and 4 year old? That's
mm,
not big. That's not fancy. I'm not going to win a Nobel Prize for that, but it's important, good, small work. Like, how am I showing up in the workplace? Like, what does that look like to believe that Black Lives Matters in the context of my work and with my colleagues, right? And none of that is sexy, and none of that is big, and none of that is showy. But I do believe that, like, by honoring this, I have a chapter in my book called Dream Small. And it's about giving honor and dignity to small dreams, because so often, there's a scripture, and I think it's either, I don't know, Jeremiah, maybe Zechariah, I can't remember, that says, do not despise small beginnings.
mm,
For the Lord delights in seeing the work begin. And
Mhm.
I love that scripture and I love that reminder that so often, and I think in our culture that's so filled with this like dream big, do the next big thing. What's the next, big sexy movement? And again, I love big dreams. I'm like, my profession is dreaming really big and then convincing other people to help make it happen because Lord knows I can't do it on my own. I'm not saying don't go after those things and there's a place for it, but also we can hold that but like, don't despise the small stuff
Mm.
and don't forget how much those small things really do matter and can one really add up and two can actually be the thing that creates the momentum that leads to the big thing.
Yeah. The verse you mentioned is Zechariah 4, verse 10. Do not despise the small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin. And
Are
I
you
see a
looking
real.
these up or are you just like do you know all of the Bible?
Leah knows the whole Bible.
It's amazing. Wow. There
I
we go.
have a
I'm getting fact
I have
checked.
I have a cheat sheet
Okay.
actually.
Okay.
I prepared in advance. That's not one that I have memorized. But I am just at this moment seeing a connection between the Zechariah 4:10 verse and the verse we mentioned before, which is Micah 6:8. The last part of that, to walk humbly with God. Like often when we talk about passion, we're like, I'm going to find that big thing or I'm a superstar. But the real guiding scriptures that you mentioned that have helped you build your passion are about being humble and starting from small beginnings. So convince us that that's true, even though, Liz, today you are a little bit of a superstar in your career. I mean, you're CEO of a fashion brand, you have a new book out. Everyone wants to go for you for advice about how to start, do a social and entrepreneurship uh, business venture. How do you convince people to really start small and be humble?
Yeah, humility, I think, is an interesting concept in our current culture that I think we've got pretty wrong. I think we think about humility is to make myself small. Um, and I think humility is actually just recognizing your part in what Richard Rohr would call the big, beautiful whole.
Mm.
And it's like recognizing that, like, there is something so freeing and so both empowering and humbling about recognizing both your importance and your smallness in the grand scheme of things. Like I tell my two sons that I love to tell them how important they are. And then I love to follow up and remind them that they're not more important than anybody else. Right. And that those
Mm.
two things can really coexist. And I think about it like one of the kind of mantras that I have to myself is thinking about the divine telling me like, Liz, you're my favorite. But then also whispering, I tell my kids this too. I'll whisper in their ears like, you're my favorite. But I tell it to both of them, but I don't think it's an untruth, right? And I think about that with God, just God being like, oh my gosh, you're my favorite. And then looking to whoever it is next to me, and then the divine also looking at them and going, oh my gosh, you're my favorite,
Mm.
And I think that sense that it's like, I'm God's favorite can come off as people are like, oh my gosh, that's like so egotistical. That's not good. And it's like, no, but if I actually believe that we're all created in the image and the likeness of our divine creator and that our creator is saying that about each and every one of us, then actually, when I believe it for myself, it actually unlocks it and allows me to believe that for somebody else as well. And when I
Yeah.
see that in myself, then I can actually see it more clearly in other people. It's not about making yourself small, it's about realizing the importance and bigness both of you and of everybody else, right? And that counterintuitively also kind of makes you feel small, but then it makes you feel small not in a dismissed or disparaging or false way, but small in this awe way. Like I think about just like a vision of like you're zooming out, you're zooming out, you're zooming out, and the majesty of zooming out and seeing your smallness versus that being like a sad or dismissive thing. And so I think embracing our kind of part in the big, beautiful whole of creation, and then also recognizing like the seasonality of it, right? Like it's about like we're all going to be called to different parts in the play. And it's about recognizing the value and the dignity of every single one of those parts, more so than being obsessed with like, well, which part is it that you're playing? Because you're right. Right now, I'm very much so, quote unquote, playing a part that is called to being probably in a lot of ways more center stage. But I think that that only works in a healthy way if it's like, but that's not my identity. And that's not also
Mhm.
where I might be for forever, right? But at this moment in time, this is the opportunity and this is the vehicle and the mechanism for me to play my part in the big, beautiful whole. And like, who am I to shrink back from that? And I think we have to be, I'm especially interested in the conversation as it relates to women, because I think that women have been conditioned, and specifically in the Christian culture, to shrink ourselves and to be ashamed
Mm.
of any bigness. And I just believe so deeply that when we dismiss or shame the bigness in us as the created, we are dismissing and shaming the bigness that where that came from, which is our creator, right? Um, and in the same way, we acknowledge and we lift up and we exalt that in our male counterparts. That's something that plenty of studies have shown, like, oh, we socially reward men who are big, who take up space, who have opinions, who are bold, who give direction, and who are successful. And there are social consequences for women who exhibit those exact same traits. And so, yeah, exploring the concept of humility and how I think we've got it wrong, but then also offering an alternative for what that looks like is something that's important to me.
That is so awesome. And can I give you an example? Because as you were talking, I keep thinking Mary, as in
Mm.
the mother of Jesus, is like the poster child for what you're talking about here,
Mm,
right? Because on the one hand, she is utterly humble and submissive to God. Let it be done with me according to your will. There's this giving of herself fully to this divine calling that's going to really change her life, and in many ways, going to be a hard life. And so she's, I'm the servant of the Lord, she says. But then when she goes on to her song, we call it the Magnificat. First of all, she's absolutely about magnifying God. So it's God's bigness, not her bigness. But he has looked on me with favor on the lowliness. So you got the
mm,
lowliness. And then, surely from now on, all generations will call me blessed. For the mighty one has done great things for me, right? So it's God is big, God is mighty. I'm the recipient. I'm lowly. Actually, all generations will call me blessed. So there's kind of a bigness in there, and yet it's a bigness that is you might say dwarfed by the bigness and grace of God,
mm.
but is still it's a lifting up of her, even as she's acknowledging herself as a servant, and yet all generations are going to call her blessed. So I just think, if you want to look to scripture for somebody who is
Yeah.
um, big and small at the same time,
Mm.
and utterly sold out to God, we don't even know if she has any, as in your language, any passion for this particular calling at this point, right? I mean,
Mhm.
but we know that there's this faithfulness, and it's about God and God's greatness and glory and grace, and she is God's servant, and therefore God is the one who would magnify her because she magnifies God. So
Hmm.
what you're saying, man, it feels like serious Mary stuff to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's
There's
really
like
good.
this smallness and bigness that happens at the same time in the same way. And this is, Mary's song is Luke chapter 1, verses 46 to 55. So if you were to look back and give your old self some advice, Liz, as you're plucking chickens or, before uh, your trip to Uganda, what's some concrete advice you could give to someone else who's like, gee, I don't know what next direction I have to go or what next steps I have to take to build my passion?
I've learned recently about a concept called CQ, which is your curiosity quotient. Um, and it's a real thing that can be measured. It has real implications. In fact, they have decided, they being, the social scientists who run these tests, have decided that your CQ is just as, if not more important in determining your likelihood of long-term success as your IQ. And that fact has like totally changed my life and has made me value, I think, curiosity to a whole new degree. I think I've always, not always, I think that there's been a part of me that has valued curiosity, but I think just like continuing to remind myself, even in those early days when I didn't know what I was doing and like, I felt for sure at times like I was a failure, I made a mistake, or I was like wasting time. I think just reminding myself of like the being empowered to know that your CQ is actually something that you can change and grow, and that like exercising and building up a muscle, you have to do that. It's not going to do it naturally. And having that be kind of the lens in which I saw my decision making. Because I was like, I'm like talking like I realized all of this in the moment sometimes. And I definitely didn't. Like I was very angsty as like getting ready to graduate college, like who am I and what am I going to do and what's my life's purpose, and like very angsty and very hard on myself. And so I think probably just the advice, like just telling her that little tidbit and lifting up and honoring her sense of curiosity, would be something that if I could go back and whisper in her ear, maybe I would share with her.
Um, Mark, what about you? Would you have any pieces of advice that you would offer someone who's like, geez, I don't know what I'm going to do with this passion issue in my life?
Well, I mean, it sounds like you're setting me up, but you could read Liz's book. That'd be a start. The other person who writes a lot about this in a very different mode, in a very different season of life, is David Brooks, the
Hmm.
columnist for the New York Times. I
Yeah.
mean, he's got so there is stuff out there that helps people, but I think even if somebody has just listened to this and they come away with this freedom from the need to discover my passion, as if I've just got to like sit there until I
Mm.
get some strong feeling and it's got to come magically. And rather, so what you just said, Liz, I mean, what are you curious about?
Hmm.
What do you care about? What right now is moving your heart at all? Where do you see a need? You talked about solving a problem. Where is there a problem around me that I'm aware of that I could actually do something about? And what might that be? And so again, it's the freedom from sort of the obsession with passion. It's the freedom to do small things. I love it that you talk about that too. I mean, that's right on. And because I think that can give people in any season of life. I mean, I work a lot now with people who are um, in or entering retirement. So really on this other side of life, but it's the same kinds of questions. They're saying like, what is next for me? I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And that same kind of freedom that you're offering is going to be so important for them. Don't feel like you've got to do a big thing, and don't feel like you've got to have a big passion. Start where you are. Use Micah 6:8. I mean, walk into it
Mm.
and see what develops. And I think so. I think part of what Liz you're offering is it's freedom. Now, I would say, and you would say too, it's actually the freedom that God offers us, through
Mm.
His grace. So what you're doing is taking that, who God has made us, and reframing it in a way that people can really connect to. And I think it's a great gift you're giving.
Yeah. And I think the recognition too that it's like there's nothing I can do to make God love me less or more. And your
Mm,
passion actually falls into that. Like you
mm,
are beloved. You are a beloved child of God, whether or not you have found it, whether you're doing it, whether it's just like, does it deeply affect your life and it is a good and meaningful thing to pursue? Yes. Does it change your status with God? Will you feel more or less loved by the divine? I would say no. On
mm.
the alternative side, I have a feeling you don't want me to cuss on your show, so I'm not going to, but I'm going to say your ish still stinks, right? Where it's like on the
Mm.
alternative side, you can be living your passion and like you're still going to have issues. Like you're still going to have
Mm.
stuff that you have to work out in yourself, and you're still going to have hard spots in your marriage, and you're still going to
Mm,
have, potentially financial woes, and people are still going to get sick, and like it's not a magic bullet. It's so important and it's so good and it's so worthy. But one of my like things that it is such a red flag for me, like in an interview process, that I will not hire somebody who comes into an interview and who I can tell has some big problems in their life with just contentment or having not quote unquote found it yet. And I can tell in their voice and by the way that they're talking about this opportunity, this job, that it's like, but if I get this job at Seiko and I just can do something I'm passionate about, then
It's going to fix everything.
It's going to fix everything. And that is a huge red flag to me. One of our core values at our company is called bring your why. It's like, you got to do the work on your own. And then if you're lucky and if you're living in an alignment, then you get to bring that to an organization. And every day you get to live out that why and you get to experiment with it and you get to have like a real world, like contribution. And that's a beautiful, amazing thing that I think is so wonderful for the human spirit. And when we can be living in integrity and in alignment, but like no passion, no job, no opportunity is going to fix you. That is taking something that is good, but it is misplacing it and making it, ultimately I would say it's like making it into an idol, right? It's like saying this is a good thing, but I'm taking it out of the context of where it belongs and I'm putting it into a place where it doesn't belong. And then by nature, I'm messing it up.
I really do agree that when we start to say finding my passion or even building my passion will fix everything, then we're barking up the wrong tree. We're forgetting this idea that passion involves suffering sometimes. Jesus's passion involves suffering. And moreover, life involves some hardship, some suffering, and some real work. And part of building a life that's meaningful in relationship with God means doing some of the hard work and means having some of it not be all sunshine and roses and fireworks all the time. And I think that's a message. That would be my one piece of advice. Like, you're okay. If you're not finding your passion, if your life doesn't feel like it's sunshine and roses right now, it might never be, but it can be really meaningful. We will encourage all of our readers to pick up Liz's book, which again is called Beginner's Pluck, Build Your Life of Purpose, Passion, and Impact Now. And you can get it to read or you can get it on Audible where Liz will read it to you as a bedtime story or as a daytime story. And Liz, this was really enjoyable. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you both so much for having me.
Yes, indeed.
That's our show. Don't miss the next episode. Be sure to subscribe.
And if you like what you've heard, please leave a review. We'd love to hear from you, and it helps other people find us. Thanks for listening.